The history of steam locomotion on the railways of Great Britain spanned a period in excess of 1.5 centuries. In that period, the steam locomotive was developed from the crude, slow machine of the early days into a powerful, fast prime mover, capable of handling virtually any kind of traffic suitable for railway transportation. Development was very rapid in the first half of the steam locomotive's commercial life. The early engines could barely reach double-figure speeds, but that wasn't too important when they were used to haul freight over relatively short distances. But the opening of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway in 1829 changed all that, as it was designed from the outset to carry passengers, and this led to competition to produce faster machines. Its Rainhill trials were won by the legendary Rocket, which was the first man-made machine to exceed 30 miles per hour. Thereafter, steam locomotive development progressed along two parallel lines, freight traffic requiring more power and passenger more speed. Throughout the 19th century, locomotive engineers built larger and faster steam locomotives, whilst in the 20th century, when other forms of transport began to eat away at the railway's monopoly, they broke the magic 100-mile-per-hour barrier, reaching the highest speeds of all in the 1930s, the decade of speed. The image of the railways in the 1930s is one of success. The Great Western's chocolate and cream coaches were an enduring symbol of a railway at the height of its power and prestige. Every schoolboy knew the Cornish Riviera Express, with its magnificent castles and kings, and railways were the accepted way to travel, whether for pleasure or for work, for passengers or for freight. But the 30s started on a sour note. The strikes of the 1920s had foreshadowed growing social unrest, and the Wall Street crash had heralded the Great Depression, which was to dominate the early years of the decade. On the railways, there was a downturn in business, which was to result in the laying up of many locomotives. However, this coincided with a time when many locomotives were due for replacement in any event. The golden era of the late Victorian and early Edwardian times having produced a large stock of locomotives reaching the end of their economic lives by the beginning of the 30s. On no railway was this more apparent than on the Great Western Railway. The abolition of the broad gauge in 1892 and the consequent re-equipping of the locomotive stock which had taken place under Dean and Churchwood had resulted in a requirement to rebuild or replace many different types of engine. In addition, the locomotives of the various smaller companies absorbed by the GWR in the 1923 grouping were deemed non-standard, whilst changed operating requirements, allied to improvements to the infrastructure, meant that larger locomotives could be employed. Under Churchwood, the GWR was amongst the first to embrace wholehearted standardization, and its unique position amongst the Big Four, effectively untouched by the grouping, meant that this policy could be continued unchanged by his successor, Charles Collett. This had already become obvious at the end of the 20s, when the first-generation Churchwood engines, now over a quarter of a century old, became due for replacement. The counties and county tanks could be replaced by 6-coupled machines, and were to be seen on Swindon's famous dump alongside the products of the Dean era, with their double frames and enormous domes.